It's great to have you guys here. You're both neuroscientists. You're possibly the smartest people in the room, in a very smart room. But I want to ask, from my point of view as a layman, as someone who maybe doesn't understand the science, how ready do you think society is for these kind of enhancements that you guys were just talking about? Olivier, from your vantage point, you've worked with the French government, you've looked at policy. What does that tell you about where we are as people and as society?
Would you like to start?
Sure. So one of the roles that I play is co-chair of the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on Human Enhancement. And we actually conducted a survey this year with the AARP, which is a US-based policy organization. And we did a survey that was about 2,500 people, representative sample in the US, looking at what people's attitudes were on human enhancement. And we published it in Scientific American. And it was fascinating. We were looking at vision enhancement, mobility enhancement, gene editing, and cognitive enhancement, both pharmacologically and through implants. And the idea was to not only educate people as to what technology might be able to do, but also were they open to it. And it's interesting because one of the headlines said, most Americans are against human enhancement beyond human capability, but 40% were for it. To me, that's actually the news, that 40% of Americans, and this was across demographics, are actually in support of enhancement beyond just restoring function. So that was very surprising to me.
Do they understand, though, what they're voting for, in a way? Do they
Yeah,
get it?
I mean, it's a great, it's a very comprehensive survey, and you can actually access, through the Scientific American article, you can then access the original survey and the documents. It was very well done, because you're right, you have to first educate people as to what does it mean to enhance vision. And Olivier spoke to that very eloquently, that many of us, enhance our vision already. So you can imagine 100% of Americans are in support of wearing glasses or contact lenses. That's not very controversial. So you take them from there and then you move them along. Olivier, you wanted to add to that?
Sure. Who in the room thinks that doping in sports is bad? Who in the room is taking coffee in the morning in order to perform at work? How interesting is it, right? That society is ready to accept some form of performance enhancement and reject others. And this is the whole dilemma that we're facing in the future with human enhancement. As an individual, I want to be able to choose whether I will be enhanced or not. As an individual, I want to make sure that I will not be discriminated when my choice is made public. But also, as an individual, I need to accept that if I refuse human enhancement, I could be left behind by society. And this is part of a whole dilemma. What are we doing with what we know about the human biology, the neurobiology, the cognitive sciences? But also, what are we doing in order to integrate this in the ecosystem? And how prepared are we to being enhanced? Let's think about something very simple. As a male, I want to be stronger as I age. So let's say that my strength improves. How adapted the environment will be if I have 1,000 times more power in my hand than before. The first door I'm going to open, I'm going to break it. So this is very down to earth. But think about the systemic consequences and the need to adapt all the environments to us being enhanced. If I got better hearing abilities, do I really want to hear what people are saying at the back of a room right now? How am I going not to be distracted by it? So on and so forth. So
it's a matter of degrees. It's a matter of how far we go. And If we think about technology, though, it's difficult to inspire people by saying, I'll let you hear better, a little bit better, or I'll let you be a little bit stronger. People get inspired by, going to the moon, by the kind of big things, about telling us how we can run as fast as cheetahs, or, hear beyond just in our immediate space. So to get funding, to get interest, to get people involved, you kind of have to be a little bit crazy, right, with the way you talk about these things?
That's one way to see it, because you're obviously in great physical and maybe mental shape.
Inshallah.
But a lot of people don't want to hear about going to the moon. They just want to be able to go from point A to point B. Think about quadriplegic people. First, being able to go from one side of a room to the other would be already a moonshot for them. So we also need to adapt our goals and allocate the right budgets to what we think is right. And Corey and I had a discussion regarding when do we need to fix things? When do we decide that a disability or limitation, physical or mental, is a problem? Is aging a problem we need to fix? Or is it just being human?
Well, you mentioned that we're ignoring the brain, which is a pretty major thing to be ignoring. Yet when we talk about future enhancement, that seems to be such an important part of the discussion. What we do with the brain, how the brain is impacted, how we use the brain. But if we're ignoring it, if at the most basic level we don't even think when you go to see the doctor, oh, just check my brain, then how in the future, it's difficult to imagine a point where we'll understand where we need that enhancement in the brain and how we need to deal with the brain.
Well, I think the key there is something that Olivier mentioned in his talk, which is quantifying healthy. I think in some ways we're moving away from these targeted disease states and diagnosis and treatment, and we're really trying to understand how do we quantify healthy. And you've all heard of the Internet of Things, which we usually think of connecting machines to each other, but really it's an Internet of things and people. We are interacting with those devices. We all have wearables. I generate more data in a day than my doctor sees in a year. This data is reflective of my health and well-being. And I think more and more we're bringing to bear resources like machine learning and AI to understand what this data means about our behaviors, our interaction with the environment, and we're going to be able to actually quantify health, which will enable us to stay healthy.
I know you talked about staying with our feet close to the ground and thinking of the small wins that we can get for people. And I know you're both very serious scientists. I mean, Olivier, you have more than 200 publications in your name. But I have to ask, when will we be able to use the Force like in Star Wars and move stuff with our minds?
The answer is easy. Yesterday. Yesterday, because being able to interact with objects with our minds is something which is actually quite mainstream when you're in neurotechnology, in labs, but now out of labs. And I think that in order for you to have just a quick visual demonstration, let me show you what we can do.
It's lucky you had this.
Yeah, what a surprise. So this is a device that records the electric activity of my brain. It sends the signal to a portable device that is communicating with our cloud and machine and deep learning algorithms, allowing to detect in real time the brain activity, the patterns of brain activity. And these patterns of brain activity can be talking to connected objects with the Internet of Things. And recently, we allowed a quadriplegic person to drive a Formula One with his mind only, with one of his devices, which means that beyond the performance, the learnings we got from the technological and human development allowed to improve the new generation of wheelchairs and provide people who in order to go from point A to point B, if they are quadriplegic, require to ask someone to help them, just to move from one point to another without asking for the first time in years, bringing them autonomy and dignity.
But someone drove a Formula One car with their mind.
Yes.
I mean, just to be clear, at what speed?
More than 80 kilometers an hour. And actually, he recently challenged Lewis Hamilton to race him, and Lewis picked up the challenge. So we're working on organizing the mind race.
I'd like to see that.
Oh, we all want to see that. I think, give me just a few seconds.
You're going to we'll
continue the discussion.
On that note, you're very naturally curious, Corinna. Whatever interests you, you just seem to leap into that. And you were talking about soldiers earlier. Nobody came to you and said, please work with soldiers. That was something that came to you as an area that needed work on. Is that how you generally explore areas for development and finding applications?
I'm interested in the human-technology interface. I believe that I'm a techno-optimist. I think technology can help us as humans to do great things. And I think the trick is to figure out how do you, there's a lot of problems in this world that need solving, and how do you match what technology can do to the problems that need to be solved. And so that's what gets me excited. It's how can we actually match technology to real world problems.
And this is all stuff that will apply in the real world that we're talking about.
Already applies. I think one thing in common that Corey and I have is we both started being academics, researchers, and we moved to other organizations. I worked at the World Economic Forum. Corey founded this incredible company, Antrotronics, with applications that range from the military to helping disabled people to learning to healthcare. And the idea that the knowledge we got from science, and it was just fantastic to hear Your Excellency when you spoke about the power of science and all sciences, the fact that science is a big ensemble that ranges from humanities to neurobiology and physics, and to see how we can use that for the better good. It's one thing to be geeks in labs and explore, but explore and help people is something that I think is as important. And I think now we can have a look at one of the most intimate parts of myself, my brain.
And that's it. That's your brain.
So that's my brain. What you see is a 3D representation and mapping of my brain and where the activities currently is. Below are detection metrics that in real time are assessing my cognitive states, some of my cognitive states. So this might look like science fiction to you, but it's just simply science in action. I've been, over the past 15 years, using neurotechnologies to work in education to better understand the relation between teachers and students, in healthcare to better understand how patients and caregivers are interacting and why there is so much waste in healthcare delivery. But think also wellness at work, mind wellness, being able to monitor in real time attention and distraction. Behind the wheel, there are huge issues with people driving. And if you think this is just the beginning, China has already implemented detection of attention in factories for bus drivers, taxi drivers, in schools for pilots at a scale that you can't imagine. And one of the benefits is to be able to identify when people are too tired, because attention and distraction are at the core of many accidents, of incredible losses of productivity. And interestingly, the only way that they were assessed were with a couple of observations, but we're not good at just observing. We need hardcore data, rigorous methods in order to better understand how people put themselves and their organizations at risk. What are the benefits? For employers, people are more efficient. For employees, your workday is designed according to your ability to focus 45 minutes or 2 hours in front of a computer. Why stick to people facing a computer for 2 hours if that person every half hour just needs a 5-minute break?
I'm watching your brain, and I never thought I'd say that, but it keeps moving. So I mean, like, your levels of excitement are up and down, your stress levels are up and down, your engagement is up and down. Is that normal?
It's normal because, as I was mentioning some of these topics, there are some that are more interesting from a scientific point of view, that I'm more passionate about than others. And ultimately, if we talk about being able to prevent accidents, to save lives, you should see a high level of engagement in my brain and beyond.
It feels like the brain is so sophisticated that it's working at a level beyond what we even need day to day in terms of our human interactions. It moves so fast, it's so nuanced, it's so complex. It is a kind of an excitement that, you know, we're just tapping the beginning of things. And that chair is not as good as the brain.
Yeah, having problems with the chair, simple things.
Yes.
The complex things I can handle. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the fields that is super exciting to both of us is the field of epigenetics. And how is the environment affecting our gene expression? And especially when it comes to things like neurodevelopmental disorders. I mentioned Parkinson's and autism earlier. In the past 10 years, we've had a revolution in our understanding of how our genes actually work. You know, we talked earlier about gene editing, and gene editing has gotten a lot of press, particularly when it comes to human enhancement. But what I think is even more exciting is something that didn't even exist or we didn't know about when I took biology, which is microRNA, which regulates how proteins are expressed. And we can affect those from the environment. And so we're at a point now where we are going to have critical understanding of how the environment is affecting our gene expression, and the implications for that in brain health are really going to revolutionize our understanding of disease.
So with work on disease enhancement, should it be left to, with respect, the likes of you to decide how this is all regulated, what the guidelines are, what the ethical boundaries are? I mean, shouldn't governments and a sort of broader consensus around the world decide what is correct and how we should move forward?
I think, as a scientist, I would never say what is correct and what is not. I think we've got an ability to identify mistakes and to inform policymakers about mistakes not to make. Predicting the future is very hard, as we all know, but we've got a fantastic system that allows us to predict the future. It's memory. We all always think that memory is about remembering the past, but it's mostly an instrument to better understand what not to do in the future, for starters. Secondly, of course, we need regulation as to how the data is collected, how the data is anonymized or not, especially when you know that even anonymized healthcare data requires a few data points to be able to re-identify it. What do we do with this data? There is something that worries me a lot more than the giants of tech using my data to understand my behavioral patterns, is for people to regulate my life as a citizen without scientifically evidence-informed policy. This is way more dangerous than the misuse of data, is the lack of usage of data. And we're in the aftermath, or still in a big scandal with one of the major social media and allegations and information about rigging elections. But the same social media has prevented thousands of kids from committing suicide. The same algorithms. And it's a good illustration as to how one of the dilemmas that we mentioned at the very beginning is Of course, history, science history, innovation history has told us so many examples of technologies, innovation that was developed for the better good and was hijacked. And it's going to be the case with data. Governments need to have science ministers, AI ministers, in order to understand what some parts of the future are and to stop living in the past century. The way policy is still conducted, especially in the EU, is so last century and not adapted to what our lives are today, starting with the need for evidence-informed policy.
Corinne, maybe from the US point of view, you've been involved in discussions about policy. Maybe the last word can come from you on where we are in the States with that.
Now I have to say something profound if it's going to be the last word.
There's been a lot of profound
pressure.
stuff on stage, don't worry. No pressure.
I think technology moves faster than regulation, so I just think it's going to have to be, we're all going to have to work together, particularly as entrepreneurs and technologists and scientists, to be responsible and think about unintended consequences and work with policymakers. I mean, it's going to have to be an all hands on deck to make this work and work effectively for everyone.
Please join me in thanking both Olivier and Corinne. Thank you for a fascinating discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.